Hi everyone, my name is Lhano and this is Connected, the podcast of Nova Economics Club.
The ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro.
Is that he were rather the poor were poorer.
This can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession.
Today, we are here with our three guests from this month's monthly report, April 2021. We have here Isabel, Pedro, and Aleyna, who is joining us from our international partner, Connecting St Gallen, an economics club from University of St Gallen. First, I would like to welcome the three of you and thank you for being here with us today. Today, we are going to discuss three topics that impacted our world over the last month. Despite they are not directly economic, they have all had an impact in our world in an economic view. We are going to discuss the US-Turkey tensions, the COVID-19 crisis in India, and finally we are going to talk about the European Super League. Turkish President Erdogan said that the relations between Turkey and the US had sunk to a low point after Joe Biden formally recognized the Armenian genocide. That happened a century ago. In his fearless fight for human rights, Joe Biden recognized the guilt of the Turkish people, as well as his government, in this genocide, destroying even a bit more a relationship that was already really complicated after Turkey bought Russian missiles and after the Turkish central bank helped Iran to dodge the international sanctions mainly imposed by the US due to Iran's nuclear program. The two NATO partners, as well as the two NATO highest financiers, are now more far from each other than they have ever been in the past few years. The world awaits to see where this goes. So, after Biden's administration official recognition of the Armenian genocide, do you believe that this marks a new period of relations between these two NATO countries, US and Turkey, more precisely towards President Erdogan, which Biden has already criticized openly regarding on its positions on the matter of human rights?
So thank you, I'm really happy to be here. Maybe just to contextualize a little bit, like a few weeks ago, Biden called the Turkish President Erdogan to inform him about that the US would want to make the designation on the 106th anniversary of the genocide, which took place on the 24th April of 1915. And the conversation was actually really tense between the two presidents. And now I don't really want to go maybe into the genocide history and like what's behind that. I'm just going maybe to talk a bit at what's happening right now with the two presidents. I think it's, well, I really don't want to have maybe a too strong opinion. I think it's just strange and almost convenient that this story just came out now. Like, as also Biden said, it's the 106th anniversary, so it didn't happen like in the last 20 years. So I find it a bit strange that this just came up now. And that's a bit my question also, like why did it came up now, this recognition, like why didn't the former president understand this? And the thing is, like, since I'm Turkish, it's always really interesting to see how the point of view of the East isn't really represented in the West. And that's maybe a bit important to me also to say something about that. So Turkey was actually always really open to show the records and everything in history, but there wasn't really an investigation. Like with the Holocaust, there was an entire commission that did an investigation on this. And in this case, it didn't really happen. So the thing that I think is that this is really practical. It's not about recognizing a genocide, but I think it's more a political move from the US. And And yeah, I think that with this declaration, the tension will be a lot like strong between the two countries, between US and Turkey. I still think it maybe won't be like, in my opinion, it won't be made 100% official also by the parliaments and stuff, because it could have a huge impact between the relationship of the two countries. The US has a strong relationship with Turkey since a lot of years, because they need, like, if I can say that, they need Turkey to be and to go into the Middle East. It's a really strategic position. So I think it would be interesting to understand how this went down and how this is going to be in the future. And yeah, I really hope that there will be a nice solution, that there won't be too much tension in the future between the two countries. And yeah, that's quite it. Sorry for talking too much.
So now going on to more short questions to our other guests, I would ask you, do you believe that this recognition of the genocide by the US might harm the possibility of reconciliation between Turkey and Armenia that some people had been hoping for?
Well, thanks again for having me in this podcast. And well, I think the possibility of reconciliation between Turkey and Armenia goes way beyond the recognition of external countries about this topic. Many people probably don't know this, but the genocide did not occur 20, 30, 40 years ago. It has been more than 100 years ago, and this conflict is still waiting to be solved, and I don't believe that this depends on the US recognition or not. There are not many people that were there that remember what happened, and these people in Armenia, Turkey, and US believe on what the history tells them in school, on the internet, on the international forums. So I don't think that these recognitions really help to solve the problem, because the problem is not on the recognition of it. It is on education, and more than that, in the culture of both countries. And this is something that the external countries have little to help to offer to both countries.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I will ask you if you think that the US can take advantage of Turkey's fragile current economic situation to reposition themselves and gain a stronger bargaining power in diplomatic relations with Turkey.
Well, just like my colleagues, thank you for having me. And let me jump straight into your question. I think the US can use Turkey's economic situation to gain bargaining power, especially as one of Turkey's main trading partners. But I think the key factor here is geopolitics. President Biden's campaign was heavily focused around redeeming the US when it comes to human rights, and Turkey might be falling behind on this matter. A recent example concerns President Erdogan's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. So the US can use this to pressure allies into siding with itself. However, I also have to agree with Aleyna on this one, because Turkey still has a really important geographic location, and the US is closely watching Turkey's relationship with Russia due to military concerns, but also Turkey's relationship with China, because Turkey's role on the Belt and Road Initiative has been growing. And finally, Turkey still has the second largest army in NATO, so these two factors can also push the bargaining power towards Turkey. I am still not quite sure where the line is drawn, but I guess we can wait until June, where we have the next NATO summit, and both presidents have agreed to discuss bilateral and regional issues.
So thank you very much, Isabel. And catching on your last sentence, you mentioned the geopolitical versus human rights debate. What do you think that will actually lead the way? Do you think that it will be more important the geopolitical bargaining power from both sides, or the human rights bargaining power that the US can implement and can argue that they are fighting this for human rights? What do you think?
Exactly. So I think it's here. Maybe I will talk a bit more than I should. I think it's happening at a very convenient time, also for Biden. I think there's also a lot going on in the situation in the U.S. Because maybe on one hand the Black Lives Matter, on the other hand also the Asian American hate and everything. And maybe the Biden administration feels that they have to take a position on this matter. As I said, I find it really convenient to do that after more than 100 years. A bit strange. So yeah, I think on one hand they will maybe use that as a facade. So they will use the human rights as a front. But the real thing that is behind it won't be human rights, but wants to be the geopolitical situation. So I think if I am allowed to say that, the situation is more like an excuse to come to another solution. The goal that they have in mind isn't the recognition of the genocide, but having a strategic better position, in my opinion.
I don't know to what extent Biden's administration is using human rights just as a front. There is still value in defending said rights, but I heavily agree that the geopolitical factor is the main decision driver, and it will probably continue to be. Biden's administration is now trying to recover what the US lost during the Trump administration. For example, there were a lot of tensions regarding international trade, namely with China. So by having Turkey under close watch, the US might try to use it as a paving way to rebuild connections with other strategic partners.
India has been experiencing hard times due to COVID-19. In the beginning of April, India was experiencing around 80,000 new cases per day. However, at the end of the month, this number has already increased to more than 400,000. Deaths are also dramatically increasing during this pandemic shock. The poor sanitary conditions, as well as the difficulties for the government to enforce the use of individual protection measures as well as the collective ones, made the task of stopping the transmission really hard and almost impossible. The vaccination plan is late and oxygen is missing at almost every hospital. The situation was completely out of control during the entire month of April, and it's still not controlled nowadays. So going on to our next topic, which is the COVID-19 crisis in India. The COVID-19 crisis in India has been shocking the world, but now we are not going to discuss the COVID part because we have already discussed it regarding other countries here in our podcast Connected, but we are going to discuss the implications and the way this paradigm can change in a country like India. So, because almost as important as stopping these COVID numbers to grow so fast, India must also address the sanitary problem they have in the near future, because it is a fact that sanitary conditions in some parts of India are absolutely terrible. And a lot of specialists say that this is the major reason, of course, allied with poverty, for such higher number in COVID-19 cases. So I would ask you, what should be the way for India to develop itself in the next few years in order to avoid being so devastated by a health crisis similar to this COVID-19 one?
Well, before discussing the measures themselves, I'm just going to give a brief context of the Indian healthcare system. So, according to the National Health Profile, although higher than before, India's expenditure on healthcare amounted to 1.28% of GDP in 2019. This falls short when compared to Western countries, But it also falls short when compared to neighboring countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan, where both countries spent over 3% of GDP on their public healthcare systems. But we also have data on the ratio of doctors per patient, and in India it is estimated that it is at 1 doctor per 1,456 people, which is above the World Health Organization norm of having 1 doctor per 1,000 people. And this problem is exacerbated when we talk about rural areas, where people often have to travel miles in order to access medical services. And we can see this by the ratio of having 1 doctor per 10,926 people. So this underinvestment in public healthcare can help explain the poor sanitary conditions you have mentioned. But moving on to the measures, I think, although ambitious, it is extremely important to increase the budget allocated to healthcare and to use this budget to better infrastructures and to reduce inequalities on access. But I also think education can play an important role because India has a shortage of doctors and nurses, paramedics, etc. So the country can take advantage of its growing and young population by investing in their training. And it would be even better if this population had access to remote medicine technology, let's say, so that they can ease the difficulties in accessing rural areas. But on a final note, I know these measures are lengthy and costly, so it is hard to tell if they can be implemented or not in time for us to see their effects.
Next, I will ask you if you think that the United Nations and the international community as a whole should help India, or should they allow India to remain serene while managing this crisis? Because, of course, international cooperation is always important, and this seems a situation that needs international help and intervention. But, of course, there is always the idea that we should let countries to solve their problems, because most of the times countries do not like to have other people like messing around in their own business. So what do you think that should be the correct balance here and the correct solution?
For me, it is one of the type of situations where the UN and the international community should intervene, because as it has been said several times, this pandemic is not a civil war. It's not each country or a group of countries fighting the virus alone. It is a world war, and the international community, especially the United Nations, should acknowledge that now it's the time to intervene in India, one of the most populated places on Earth, and with major difficulties on managing resources, which is in fact one of the parts where the international community can help with expertise on allocation of resources, for instance. Moreover, the spending on healthcare in India in 2018, it was like 100%, when, for example, in the US it's 17%, which, aligned with Isabel's presented reasons, can explain the tremendous impact that COVID had on the second wave in India.
Okay, thank you. And I will finally ask you if you think that India, as for its recovery after they recover from the shock, should they focus themselves on exporting, as they can produce goods at a very cheaper price, also because of the cheap labor they have, and therefore they can implement an expansionary monetary policy to help these exports growing? Or do you think that India should change the paradigm and invest in their internal market, because it's one of the biggest in the world in terms of population, despite the fact that economically it's not so relevant, as people are really poor and cannot buy so much things? What do you think?
So, as you said, India is like that huge country with so many peoples in it, and I think that if used in a better way, it could become really a really important nation worldwide. It could have a bigger power in the world economy. So I think the main point is also to make the Indians itself richer. Now I'm not really aware if that has to be done through monetary policy, or if it's better to increase the internal economy to better that situation. But I think the main goal should be to the end goal should be to really have a better situation for the people living in it, and the politicians should be aware which way could achieve this goal.
On the 18th of April, 12 European top teams have announced the creation of the European Super League. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Manchester United, Manchester City, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Juventus, Inter and AC Milan came up with a project as founding clubs. They meant to be joined by other 3 founding clubs and to invite other 5 clubs every year to complete a 20-club competition. The idea was to increase the amount of exciting and competitive games in European football, as well as increasing revenues for the participating clubs. This project was very criticized not only by UEFA, but also by the players and staff of the teams and by their fans all over the world. The project that was said that lacked competitivity and didn't recognize sports merit lived for only 2 days, as all English clubs quit the competition after tremendous protests were done by their fans.
So, do you think that this exit from the UEFA jurisdiction should lead to clubs being punished? The founding and joining clubs should be punished? And also, if you believe that legislators and governments should act and implement the 50% plus one rule that exists, for example, in Germany with clubs like Bayern Munich, in which funds are obligated to have at least 50% plus one share of the country, of the clubs.
Well, my opinion, and I believe it is similar to the common sense, it is that all clubs involved in this process should be punished by their actions and negotiations around this manner. It is not acceptable to have 12, 15 clubs that are part of major institutions as UEFA and FIFA to suddenly decide that they must be the ones that take the decisions and that all sport is about them. It is fully clear that this decision was not about competition, it was about one little thing: money. We all know that the amount of money involved in these transfers and negotiations in football has been growing and rising in recent years, but this decision of creating a closed league where the big sharks take all the money and leave the smaller clubs to play alone is an atrocity to the sport, and this can be seen by the clubs chosen, not clubs with not clubs that are performing well or that have a glorious past, but clubs that have more money, and just that. In my point of view, this decision is an insult to all institutions, broadcasts, clubs, fans that for a moment thought that their and my also sport has failed and will not have it back. Returning to the question, all clubs involved should be punished, but as Alexander Safarin, the president of UEFA, already suggested, these 12 clubs should be divided in 3 categories, according to the time and moment that they retired from this project. Responding to the second question, the implementation of the 50+1 rule in other countries can be seen as a solution to solve this type of problems, namely when money is in front of competition and love to the sport, independently if it's football, gymnastics or rugby, for instance. Moreover, the success of this idea has already been seen in the Super League topic, because the German clubs that have the 50+1 rule for more than 20 years, I think, refused the project in a glance, because in these clubs we not see the investors taking the decisions, we see the fans, and I have 100% faith on fans rather than external investors that seek profits. This 50 plus 1 rule is designed to ensure that the club's members retain overall control, owning 50+% of shares plus 1 share, protecting clubs protecting the clubs from the influence of external investors. As a consequence, I believe that legislators should act to an approximation of this idea, because some problems here in Portugal as well, as we see with Belenenses, would have been solved with this idea, and some clubs would not have been bankrupt due to decisions of people that prefer more digits on their bank account rather than trophies on their cabinets. So, as a matter of fact, there are already petitions, especially in English football, for the government to act on this issue, and we have already seen protests about this with the invasion of Old Trafford, the stadium of Manchester United, in the past weekend. In conclusion, I couldn't agree more with the 50+1 rule in order to save the clubs and their dreams in football, which is and should be a sport, not a way of making money.
Okay, Pedro, thanks a lot for your inputs. I will now ask you if you think that the clubs involved in Super League have had any time a real intention of going forward with the Super League, or if the Super League was just an idea to gain power. Because there was already the idea spread that countries only wanted to have more power when negotiating with UEFA, their clauses. But there were some clubs already, like for example Shakhtar Donetsk in Ukraine, that have said that these changes will actually reduce the club's bargaining power, as UEFA has now all the fans in their side, as they think they are fighting for football for the fans against the Super League. So what do you think that happened, and do you think that Super League was ever a project, a reality, or it was just a move to get more power and to get more money?
Okay, so as Pedro said, I think it wasn't about sports or doing a new project, but more about money. So I admit I had to ask a few male friends of mine to help me with this question. So I hope I'm going to say the right things. I believe that in the last 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, there were like a lot of debts in a lot of big football clubs, and this could also be the root behind this idea. And so the truth is that the commercial power of the Super League would have been huge for the clubs. And so if this idea would actually have been successful and everything would have gone in the right way, they would have had a huge beneficial, like an economic beneficial. So as Pedro said, money is behind this idea. I also think that the Super League maybe was dragged by a few clubs, and that the other just joined to not miss the opportunity. So I really think that the reason behind this project was to have a bigger power with UEFA and not for other reasons. And it was just an economic aspect.
And finally, there was a sentence that marked all the discussion and the debate around the Super League, which was the sentence from Super League's chairman, Florentino Perez, that said that football needed to be safe, that football was not entertaining anymore, and that needed to be safe, that needed a change of paradigm in football. So do you actually think that this is true, that football needs to be safe? And besides, do you think that if a club is not profitable, which is one of the things that marked the beginning of this Super League idea, do you think that the way should be restructuring competitions, new ways of doing competitions? Or do you think that clubs should change, for example, their cost structure in the way they manage transfer markets, paychecks, etc., commissions to agents and all of that? Or do you think that they actually need to get more money from new competitions, for example, Super League?
Well, from what I gathered, Florentino Perez argued that football needs to be saved because young people are no longer interested and major football clubs have been facing huge losses. But as my colleagues have mentioned, is restricting competition between teams going to save football for the fans? Or is this just a move to save clubs' profitability? People will argue on both sides, but I do think it's more on the profitability one. And to answer the other part of the question, I think restructuring competitions could be used as a mechanism, but what we've seen so far is that this restructuring has mainly favored top teams. So, as Pedro said, what about the other ones that are smaller but also have financing issues? And finally, regarding the paychecks, COVID has showed us that the players' paychecks can be reassessed in order to ensure that other staff can receive full wages. And despite this being a short-term measure, I think it would be interesting to study the extent to which it can be implemented. Again, people will argue on both sides, and there are a lot of factors that play into a football player's wage, but I think it is interesting nonetheless to understand how this market is being regulated.
Okay, thanks a lot for your inputs. Again, I will thank the three of you for coming here, for talking to us, Pedro, Isabel and Aleyna. A special thank to Aleyna and to our international partner Connect in St Gallen for being here with us today. And that's it. This was our edition of the monthly report in April 2021. We will be back with our monthly report in May. Until there, check our social media, check our podcast, and remember, stay connected.